What's up, guys? Welcome into Taking the Field with Stevie Mack, episode 19. A quick update for you guys. Taking the Field with Stevie Mack is now on SoundCloud, which means you can now find us by searching taking-the-field.com or by searching Taking the Field with Stevie Mack on YouTube and SoundCloud. So this is just more ways for you guys to listen to the podcast as well as being able to interact with the show as well. But what I want to get to with today's episode is the Big Ten football coaching rankings put out by CBS Sports and Tom Fornelli. So what I want to do here is a few things. I'm going to break this list down into 3 tiers. The 1 through 5, 6 through 10, then 11 through 14, and I want to know who you guys think are too high, too low, and who's kind of your underrated coach here in the Big Ten, and I'll give you my takes on those things as well in just a little bit. So 1 through 5 goes James Franklin, Ryan Day, Jim Harbaugh, Kirk Ferentz, and PJ Fleck. That 6 through 10 tier goes Paul Chryst, Pat Fitzgerald, Scott Frost, Greg Schiano, and Jeff Brom. And then that final tier is Tom Allen, Lovie Smith, Mel Tucker, and Mike Locksley. So now, my take on this list, I have 2 coaches that I think are a little too high on this list as of right now, and then there's one that I think is a little too low on this list as well. And then, like I said, we'll get into my underrated Big Ten coach in just a minute. But my first coach that I think is too high on this list is PJ Fleck from Minnesota. Now, yes, you can go back to 2019 and look at the season they had, going 11-2 and coming just barely missing that Big Ten championship game and being able to play Ohio State in that one. But if you go back and look at the 2 years prior to 2019, PJ Fleck only went 12-13 over those 2 years combined after taking over a Minnesota program that won 9 games the year before he got there. And you look at the guy that's put on the list right after him in Paul Chryst. Chryst, by comparison, has won 10 or more games in 4 of his 5 years at Wisconsin, with the lone exception coming in 2018. Another name I think is too high on this list is Scott Frost, who sits at number 8, because in his first 2 years in Nebraska, he's 9-15 overall. So he hasn't really done much of anything yet. But one of the reasons he's positioned where he is on this list is because of what he was able to do at UCF that 1 year in, I believe, 2017, where they went on that incredible run and looked like they just couldn't be stopped. But really, for me personally, what I do when I look at these lists is I take into account more than anything else, what have they done lately? Meaning, what have they done at the school that they're currently at? Not necessarily what they might have done in the past that got them to where they are now. So for me, for guys like PJ Fleck and Scott Frost, I think they're still a little too high on this list because of what guys like Frost did at UCF or what PJ Fleck did at Western Michigan before going to their current locations. And then my coach that seems a little too low on this list, although personally I'm not the biggest fan of this coach, but I would have to say Tom Allen's actually a little too low on this list, being at number 11 overall. I think at worst you could probably flip-flop him with Jeff Brom at number 10, kind of sneaking Allen into that top 10 of Big Ten coaches, but I could really see him going as high as number 8 on this list, essentially bumping down Scott Frost and Greg Schiano, because Schiano hasn't even coached at Rutgers in almost a decade. So why does he get to be that high on the list when he hasn't been a head coach at Rutgers for almost 10 whole years? Now, that's not to discredit what he did to Rutgers program back then and the sort of consistency that he brought to that program, but that was then and this is now. They're 2 totally different situations, 2 totally different time periods. The whole landscape of college football has basically changed since the last time he was the head coach there. So I do think Tom Allen could stand to move up just a few spots in this list personally from Indiana. And then my underrated coach on this list is Pat Fitzgerald, because when you look at what he's been able to do in his 14-year tenure at Northwestern, he has 6 seasons of at least 8 or more wins, and he accounts for 3 of the 5 10-win seasons in program history, and he is 1 win away whenever that win will come, but he is 1 win away from his 100th career win at Northwestern. So now that I gave you my takes on who's too high, who's too low, and my underrated coach of the Big Ten, I kind of want to go tier by tier and kind of talk specifically about some of these other coaches that I may not have just touched on. And I'll start with that top tier with James Franklin. Now, some of you, and in fact, most of you, I think, will question, why is he number 1 on this list? Because when you really dig deep into it, he is one of the more accomplished coaches of this entire group in the Big Ten, even with Ryan Day's 16-1 record and a conference championship and college football playoff appearance under his belt with Ohio State. Then you slide down a few spots to number 3 where Jim Harbaugh sits, and Harbaugh, when you really get down to it, is 47-18 during his time in Ann Arbor, with 5 of those losses coming at the hands of the Buckeyes. So really, the biggest issue for him is really more of an Ohio State problem than anything else. I think that when we talk about what it is going to take to get him over that hump, so to speak, and kind of get him to that next level, it's really just at this point all about beating Ohio State. And that's really where the attention and the effort and the energy really needs to be applied to, is just beating them. And once you do that, everything else kind of takes care of itself. And then we circle back to Pat Fitzgerald, who, as I mentioned, is 1 win away from the century mark for his career at Northwestern. I also mentioned he's 3 of the 5 10-win seasons in program history. He also averages just over 7 wins per season during his time at Northwestern, where in the 112 years of Northwestern football prior to the arrival of Pat Fitzgerald, they only averaged about 4 wins per season. So that's what he brings to this program, is he kind of makes them more relevant, at least here in the Big Ten. Then you slide down to Mel Tucker at Michigan State, coming into his first year in East Lansing in 2020, and really, he didn't have much time to waste once he got to East Lansing, because he came in very late in the recruiting cycle and very late in the coaching carousel discussions. So it was really hard for him to kind of attract any recruits to come to Michigan State to play for him. And it was also probably equally as hard to kind of put together his coaching staff when you're that late in the off season of college football, gearing up for the following season. So because they're kind of so far behind the ball going into 2020, I don't really think many people are expecting a whole lot out of the Spartans coming into 2020. And then last but not least, the final spot in the Big Ten coaching rankings goes to Mike Locksley of Maryland, who really has done well in recruiting over the past year or so that he's been at Maryland. Just this recruiting class, he pulled in Rakeem Jarrett, the 5-star wide receiver. He's also the number 4 overall wide receiver in the class of 2020. And he was also able to secure a transfer commitment from Tulia Tagovailoa, who's the younger brother of Tua Tagovailoa, who is also a former 4-star quarterback from Alabama, and he was the 8th overall quarterback in the class of 2019. So he's been able to win some recruiting battles off the field, but I think now it becomes a waiting game to see if those recruiting wins translate into actual wins on the field in 2020. So that'll do it for episode 19 of Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. Make sure to like, comment, and share on this post. Let me know who you guys think are too high or too low on this list, as well as your underrated coach here in the Big Ten. Also, check out past episodes of the podcast on Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. You can also search it on YouTube and SoundCloud, as I mentioned at the top of the show. But that'll do it for this one. Thanks for listening.